Have you ever noticed how most people think the scariest thing in the forest is a bear, a wolf, or maybe getting lost? The truth is far worse, because sometimes the most dangerous predator on the trail is another person. Back in the summer of 2019, I was working as a ranger in the Bitterroot National Forest in Montana. It was late July, wildfire season, the kind of summer where the heat presses against you, even at night. My job that year was mostly fire watch and back trail inspections, checking permits, logging campfires, making sure hikers stayed where they were supposed to. Nothing heroic, just routine work. But one morning, as I was finishing up paperwork in the outpost, a man in his early 40s walked in. He looked frantic. He told me his girlfriend had gone missing overnight on the Red Hollow Trail. He said they'd started their hike around noon the day before, camped near the ridge, and when he woke up at dawn, she was gone. On paper, it sounded like the kind of case we dealt with every summer. People get turned around, wander off trail, underestimate the terrain, but right away, a few things didn't add up. First red flag, there was no record of them registering for Red Hollow. That trail had been officially closed since a rock slide 2 years earlier. Second, the parking lot he claimed they'd used was gated. And third, when I asked what gear she'd been wearing, he couldn't remember the color of her pack or whether she had a jacket. Something about his story felt rehearsed, but not well rehearsed, like he had memorized the idea of a girlfriend, but not the reality of one. Still, protocol is protocol. We called in a small search team, myself, 2 other rangers, and 3 volunteers from search and rescue. By afternoon, we were heading up toward Red Hollow. The terrain was rough. Overgrowth had swallowed most of the lower trail, and erosion had carved deep scars through the switchbacks. The air smelled faintly of smoke from distant fires. We fanned out in a grid, each of us marking trees with bright tape so we wouldn't lose coverage. At first, it was quiet, too quiet for a place that used to be popular with hikers. Then, about an hour in, one of the volunteers called out. He had found footprints, smaller than ours, likely a woman's boots, pressed deep into the dust. They weren't fresh, maybe a day old, but they led uphill. We followed. Along the way, we started finding other signs. A broken branch where someone had fallen, a torn scrap of fabric snagged on a bush. But the strangest part was how the tracks didn't wander. They weren't the meandering steps of someone lost. They were hurried, desperate, as if she had been running. By late evening, we found her. She was lying at the base of a ridge, conscious but injured, her ankle twisted badly. She was dehydrated, scraped up, but alive. Relief washed over the whole team. We radioed for medevac and gave her water while we waited. But when she finally spoke, her words froze me. She said she hadn't been lost. She had been hiding. According to her, the man who reported her missing wasn't her boyfriend at all. He was someone she had gone on a single date with months earlier. She barely knew him. He had tracked her down, insisted they go camping together, and when she refused, he threatened her. He showed up at her apartment with gear, claiming it was already planned. Afraid and unsure what to do, she agreed to go, hoping it would de-escalate. But once they were deep on the trail, his behavior turned erratic. He kept making comments about how no one would find them up there and how she belonged to him now. That night, while he was setting up camp, she slipped away. She ran through the dark, fell down the ridge, and couldn't move any further. She spent the night alone, terrified he was still looking for her. Every word of her testimony contradicted his version of events. And the fear in her eyes, the way she flinched every time a twig snapped in the distance, told us all we needed to know. When the med-evac finally arrived, law enforcement took her statement. Meanwhile, rangers searched the man's car back at the trailhead. What they found turned my stomach. Inside the trunk were her belongings, her phone, her wallet, her spare clothes. Hidden underneath a tarp were zip ties, duct tape, and a large hunting knife. He hadn't just lied. He had prepared. The so-called boyfriend was arrested on the spot. Charges included kidnapping, unlawful restraint, and attempted assault. In the weeks that followed, more evidence surfaced. Messages he had sent her, printed out and kept in a folder, full of threats disguised as declarations of love. The woman survived. Physically, she healed, but emotionally, I'm not sure anyone ever fully recovers from realizing someone was planning your disappearance. As for me, I've spent years working in the wilderness. I've seen bear attacks, blizzards, floods. Nature can be brutal, but it's honest. Human beings, though, they can hide their intentions behind a smile, behind a story about a missing girlfriend. And that is what unsettles me most. Because out there, miles from help, no cell service, no cameras, if someone decides to hurt you, the forest becomes the perfect hunting ground. People always ask rangers what the scariest thing we've seen is. They expect ghost stories, mountain lions, or strange lights. But the truth is this: the scariest thing I've ever seen wasn't a shadow in the trees. It was a man who planned every step of another person's disappearance and almost succeeded. So let me leave you with this. The wilderness isn't just dangerous because of cliffs, rivers, or storms. Sometimes the real predator is walking right beside you, pretending to care. If this story gave you chills, you're exactly where you need to be. I share true horror stories from rangers, hikers, and survivors every week. Make sure to subscribe, turn on notifications, and check out my next story about the family camping trip that ended with an unexplainable scream echoing through the valley. But before you go, answer me this. Would you rather face a storm in the wilderness or be trapped with someone you thought you could trust? Have you ever wondered what happens deep in the forest, in places so remote that even rescue teams hesitate to enter? What if I told you that not all voices carried on a ranger's radio come from the living? In 2018, I worked as a seasonal wildlife officer in Glacier National Park. My job was simple: patrol the trails, keep logs on animal movement, and assist hikers when needed. Pretty routine work. But here's the thing. When you spend long nights alone in the backcountry, the silence doesn't stay silent for long. You start hearing things, snapping branches that don't line up with animal patterns, whispers carried by the wind that almost sound human, and in my case, a radio transmission from someone who had been missing for decades. See, the problem is, the forest doesn't forget. It records every tragedy, every disappearance, every unanswered distress call. And if you stay out there long enough, eventually you might hear the echoes too. My assignment was a lonely one. I was posted at the Granite Ridge Outpost, a good 20 miles from the nearest station. Communication was spotty. We had an old repeater tower, but storms knocked it out more often than not. My days were quiet. Radio check-ins at dawn, trail inspections by mid-morning, weather logs in the evening. At night, I'd sit by the fire, fill out reports, and listen to the ordinary sounds of the wilderness. Owls, distant wolves, the sigh of the wind through pine needles. For weeks, nothing unusual happened. It was the kind of isolation that either clears your mind or drives you insane. For me, it was peaceful. Until the night of September 14th. It was just after midnight. My radio crackled with static, which wasn't unusual, but then a voice cut through. Male, strained, almost panicked. Ranger Daniels requesting backup, location 47.362 by negative 113.57. Repeat, Daniels in need of assistance. The transmission lasted maybe 6 seconds before the line went dead. Now here's the thing. Daniels was a name I recognized. Ranger Thomas Daniels had gone missing in this park in 1982. He was never found. The search had lasted weeks before it was officially called off. And the coordinates? They pointed directly to a section of the park that was closed decades ago after a landslide. At first, I thought it had to be some sick prank. Maybe another ranger playing games on the frequency. But the signal strength, the old call sign, it matched the archived transmissions from Daniel's era, and I couldn't shake it. Someone or something had just called for help. I should have ignored it, report it in the morning, let the main station sort it out. That's what the rulebook says, but curiosity and duty are dangerous together. By 12:30 a.m., I packed my kit, map, flashlight, extra batteries, and a sidearm I hoped I wouldn't need. The hike out to the coordinates would take at least 3 hours, maybe more through terrain that hadn't been maintained in decades. The first hour was uneventful, just overgrowth, downed logs, and the eerie quiet of a forest that seemed to hold its breath. By the second hour, I noticed subtle things. A trail marker carved into a tree, fresh, but in a style we hadn't used since the 80s. A rusted lunchbox half buried in the dirt. And strangest of all, boot prints leading deeper into the forest. They were old, but too preserved for this climate. When I finally reached the ridge near sunrise, my heart froze. There, half covered by moss and debris, was an old ranger station. Not on any of our current maps. Forgotten. Its door hung crooked, broken long ago. Inside, it looked like time had simply stopped. Coffee mugs still sat on the table, their stains fossilized. Papers lay scattered, some with dates from September 1982. And on the far wall, a radio set, identical to the one at my own outpost. The strangest part? The light on the radio was still faintly glowing, like it had never lost power. I stepped closer. On the desk beside it was a logbook. The last entry written in hurried scrawl. September 14th, 1982. Radio down. Strange lights on the ridge. Going to investigate. Daniels. That was the exact same night I heard his voice, 36 years later, to the day. I stumbled out of that cabin at dawn, shaken, exhausted, and questioning everything I knew. I made it back to my outpost by late afternoon and immediately called it in. Headquarters told me flat out, no record of a transmission at 12:04 a.m. No archived frequencies had been touched. According to them, Daniel's case was long closed, his body presumed lost in the wilderness. I pushed further, requesting to see the old logs. Weeks later, after paperwork and red tape, I finally got a copy of Daniel's file. And there it was, the coordinates I'd hiked to, the exact spot of his last known signal. The official story? Landslide made recovery impossible. The unofficial truth? His voice never stopped calling for help. It just took 36 years for someone to finally answer. I've never returned to that ridge. The forest has a way of keeping what it claims. But every September 14th, without fail, I leave my radio on overnight. And sometimes, through the static, I still hear him. Ranger Daniels, requesting backup. Location, 47.362 by -113.57. The same coordinates, the same plea, and the same impossible question. If Daniels is gone, who's still out there calling me? If this story made your skin crawl, then you're exactly where you need to be. I dive into true horror stories from rangers, hikers, and forgotten places every week. So if you haven't already, hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and watch my next video about the missing hiker, whose voice was heard years after his disappearance. But before you go, answer me this in the comments. Would you have followed that transmission or left the forest's secrets alone? Have you ever trusted a stranger in the woods, only to realize too late that you might be completely alone with them? It was August 2022. I was 35 and working as a seasonal ranger assigned to Black Elk Trail in the Black Hills of South Dakota. My job was mostly routine, patrolling the trail, checking permits, logging fire risks, and occasionally helping tourists who wandered off the main path. Black Elk was beautiful but isolated. The trail stretched for miles through thick pine, and once you were in deep, the radio signal faded. Cell phones? Useless. We had one tower that barely worked in clear weather. So when you were out there, it was just you, the trees, and whatever, or whoever, you happened to meet. Most days, it was peaceful. My morning started with a radio check-in, then a slow hike up the ridge, clearing branches, logging wildlife sightings. Sometimes, I'd meet hikers on their way up, families with kids, older couples, backpackers heading for a few nights in the backcountry. They'd smile, wave, ask about weather conditions, normal, harmless interactions that made the job feel safe. But that afternoon, things weren't normal. I was about 3 miles up when I saw him, a man, maybe mid-30s, standing in the middle of the trail like he'd been waiting. He smiled wide when he saw me, almost too wide, and stepped closer than he needed to. "Hey, Ranger," he said, reaching out his hand. His grip was strong, too strong, like he didn't want to let go. "Beautiful trail. I've been hoping to run into someone out here." At first, I brushed it off. People get overly friendly on the trail sometimes. But then he started asking questions, strange ones, not about wildlife or fire safety, but about me. How far I had to hike each day, whether I worked alone, how often I checked in with my station. When I asked where he was headed, he hesitated, said he was camping near the East Ridge. The problem was there was no East Ridge campsite. The trail maps hadn't shown one for years. A chill ran through me, but I kept my voice steady. "You got a permit for that?" I asked. He smiled again, too fast. Must have left it in the car. Red flag. My gut told me something was wrong, but I forced a polite nod and moved to step past him. except he shifted sideways, blocking my path just enough to make me stop. His hand brushed my arm like we were old friends. The forest was silent. No other hikers, no voices, just the wind moving through the trees. And my radio. Dead zone. I laughed it off, said I needed to keep moving, and managed to get around him. But as I walked, I could hear his footsteps falling in behind me. Every time I slowed, he slowed. Every time I sped up, so did he. My heart was pounding now. The air felt heavier, the trees closer. I kept telling myself not to panic, but my stomach was tight, my hands sweaty on the strap of my pack. I turned, trying to sound casual. Trails closed past mile 4. You'll want to head back. He just grinned. Guess I'll stick with you then. Don't want to get lost. That was the moment I realized I was completely alone with this man, 3 miles from the trailhead, no backup, no signal, and no one else coming anytime soon. I forced myself to think fast. The nearest ranger cabin was still a half-hour hike back down, but I couldn't let him know I was scared. So I pretended to relax, nodded, and said, "Sure, let's head down together." The walk back felt endless. Every branch snap made me jump. Every time he walked too close, my skin crawled. I kept rehearsing what I'd do if he tried anything: drop my pack, run, fight if I had to. Finally, the trees thinned and the trailhead came into view. I spotted a pair of hikers just arriving with trekking poles and packs. Relief hit me so hard I almost collapsed. I turned to the man and said, loud enough for the newcomers to hear, "Thanks for walking back with me. You should check in at the station before heading out again." His grin faltered for the first time. He muttered something I couldn't catch, then slipped away toward the parking lot without looking back. I don't know if he had planned something or if I was just another test of opportunity. But I've never forgotten the way he asked about me being alone, the way he blocked my path, the way his footsteps followed mine in perfect rhythm. Later, I checked our logs. No permits under his description, no vehicle matching his face. Officially, he didn't exist. And that's what haunts me most. Because I've dealt with storms, fires, even the occasional mountain lion. But nothing has ever made me feel as vulnerable as realizing that out there, miles from safety, a stranger can decide what happens to you, and no one might ever know. So the next time you're hiking and you pass a stranger on a lonely trail, ask yourself this: are they really just another hiker? Or are they waiting for a chance to be something else? If this story gave you chills, you're in the right place. I share true horror stories from rangers, hikers, and survivors every single week. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and check out my next story about the camper who discovered they weren't alone when a second tent appeared overnight in the clearing. But before you go, answer me this in the comments. Would you have kept walking calmly like I did? Or would you have run the second you realized he was following you?